see Jane James. But as we were looking to look at when Jane James began petitioning for temple blessing, her first letter to John Taylor is dated December 24th. It's dated December 27th, but it refers to last Thursday, which was December 25th, 1884. The date Elijah Abel died. So he died on Christmas Day, 1884. That day, according to Jane James's letter, she went to President Taylor's home. The letter itself, dated the day of Elijah Abel's funeral, December 27th, says this: "Dear brother, I called at your house last Thursday to have some conversation with you concerning my future salvation. I realize my race and color and cannot expect to receive my endowments as others who are white. Still, inasmuch as this is the fullness of time, and through Abraham all mankind may be blessed, is there no blessing for me?" Now we've talked about the importance of connecting with a human face. Let me show you a little bit more of Jane James's face, and I'll have Darius tell you more about who she was. This one I love because it's not posed. The next one is posed. Wasn't she beautiful? The dignity of that carriage, the dignity of who she was. And we'll let Darius tell you a little bit of her history.
Fortunately, we have her history in her own words. She dictated them. And I'll just read 2 short paragraphs here. When a child, only 6 years old, I left my home and went to live with a family of white people. Their names were Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Fitch. They were aged people and quite wealthy. I was raised by their daughter. When about 15 years old, I joined the Presbyterian Church, yet I did not feel satisfied. It seemed to me there was something more that I was looking for. I had belonged to the Presbyterian Church about 18 months when an elder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who was traveling through our country, preached there. The pastor of the Presbyterian Church forbade me going to hear them, as he had heard I had expressed a desire to hear them. Nevertheless, I went on Sunday and was fully convinced that it was the true gospel he presented, and I must embrace it. The following Sunday, I was baptized and confirmed a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. A remarkable woman in her own words, and we have far more of her words. But another one of my heroes, Sister Jane Manning James.
Let me just show you a few other shots of Jane's face, and I'm putting an emphasis on that face. She's there in the midst of the pioneers celebrating the Jubilee. This is a woman who walked 800 miles with her family from Wilton, Connecticut to Nauvoo, Illinois, who talked about how the soles of their shoes wore out, and you could see the whole footprint of their shoes in blood on the ground, the footprint of their feet in blood on the ground. And they knelt in prayer and asked God, the Eternal Father, to heal their feet. And their prayers were answered and their feet were healed. Here she is as an older woman who closed her life story despite everything she had endured. And the temple blessings, the petitions were answered with a recommend to do baptisms for the dead, but not with her firmest desire to receive her endowment and to have the work done for her family as well. She closes her life story with the words, "My faith in the gospel of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is as strong today, nay, it is if possible stronger than the day I was first baptized. I pay my tithes and offerings. I keep the word of wisdom. I go to bed early and I arise early. I try in my feeble way to set a good example for all." This is her tombstone next to her husband, Isaac. They actually were divorced. He left her for 20 years and then came back. And she allowed him to return, and his funeral was held in her home. But from this, from showing you the faces of the people that have become so dear to us as we've written about them and tried to imagine their lives, to not restrain ourselves to the history, which is not just suggest that historians who do pure history, I'm looking at Davis Bitton, who does such a wonderful work, and I've used his work as sources for my own work. But we take a few liberties by going as much as we can to the hearts and imagining what life was like. In this same idea, with what I've read to you of the philosophies of Emmanuel Levinas, of letting the face of the other human being call us to responsibility. I want to talk about the Book of Mormon as a call to empathy. The Book of Mormon has been criticized by some as a racist document, and some of the best links I've seen to talk about that are on the FAIR website. I highly recommend that you go to just the FAIR website, look at what John Fedness has said, what Armin Moss has said, what Marcus Martins has said, Renee Olson. If you go to blacklds.org, it takes you right to particular discussions on this. I'm not going to repeat anything that's already there because you can look that up. But as I look at the Book of Mormon, I see the antidote for racism that we're experiencing today, because we do. And I want to tell you just a couple of experiences that I've had in my own life, as I've not only worked in Genesis but also taught Institute to Hispanics. First of all, if you have scriptures, you can turn there. You don't need to. But if you go to Alma 26, and this is one that my husband, who, by the way, Brother Keller is also a Democrat, as is his wife. However, her parents are not. Ammon refused to see the Lamanites as enemies or less than, but always as his brethren. And if you just do a vocabulary search, when they're referred to as enemies and when they're referred to as brethren, it becomes very interesting. In fact, all the sons of Mosiah went against the persistent traditions of their own people, who viewed the Lamanites, let's move forward here. Did it do it? Did it work? Yes. As stiff-necked, whose hearts delight in the shedding of blood, whose days have been spent in the grossest iniquities, whose ways have been ways of the transgressor from the beginning. So basically saying, from the moment they were born, so probably ancestrally, they've been accursed and wicked people. And then the next idea is, don't preach to them, kill them. Destroy them from off the face of the earth. Destroy them and their iniquity. That's a huge temptation, I believe, in all generations, ours not accepted. However, the response of these remarkable missionaries, there's the instruction to destroy them in verse 25. The response, behold, my beloved brethren, we came into the wilderness not with the intent to destroy our brethren, but with the intent that perhaps we might save some of their souls. They were strengthened in this endeavor by the Lord, who told them, and again, listen to the word thy brethren, go amongst thy brethren, the Lamanites, and bear with patience thine afflictions, and I will give unto you success. And how do they do it? They don't set up a fortress that says, come and learn the truth. They enter into their houses to teach them in their streets and upon their hills. It reminds me of the huge change of heart. I just remember so well hating Guatemala and then learning, as I literally lived in the homes of the Cachiquel Indians, learning to love and adore who they were, to get a sense of the joy, to get a sense of the spirituality. One real interesting thing when I lived in, at this point it was South America, but this is when I was married and my daughter had to go back to the States for an operation, and I started crying. And one of the ladies said, you're crying. The way we think of gringos is they're so cold, they don't cry, but you're crying. Did you know that you were considered cold people by some? Because in the countries, crying is a natural thing. Abrazos and lágrimas, all of these are natural expressions. That was a fascinating insight for me. But to enter into their temples and their synagogues, to be willing to endure ridicule and persecution, it's always a temptation to defend ourselves and to not acknowledge our actions. Now, I wanted to talk very briefly, and we're already running out of time, but the whole idea of recognizing if we have offended somebody, even if we've done it negligently. And I'm going to get very personal, and some of it's so personal that I can't talk about it without crying, and so I will have Darius help me. This past year I've had a son who has just gradually been stepping out of the church and stepping out of our family standards, and has been sometimes quite abusive in doing so. Several months ago, I was privileged to meet a remarkable man, an AME pastor, who I just felt such a connection with. And I decided to write him about these